was great. All right, folks, we are going to get to Milton Alamati shortly, but first we have to get to the gem.
Yeah, so there's a lot to talk about, but I just want to frame a couple of things for people, and actually, continuing to build off of this theme of this episode and a lot of the project and the work that we've been doing. The Federal Reserve is a major part of our economy, and the left really doesn't talk about or think about it enough until it does something big. And we're seeing that happening right now, where the Federal Reserve has been actually engaging in market activities for the past few months, like significant ones. The repo crash early at the end of 2019, for example, was a massive push by the Fed to kind of like create more stability in the markets. And then obviously we're seeing what's happening now. I just wanted to take a second to sort of explain just what's happened over the past couple of days and give us a strategy going forward. So basically, since this coronavirus pandemic has started, the Federal Reserve has taken a very aggressive stand, and they actually have basically engaged in almost all of their 2008, 2009 emergency responses. So the Federal Reserve is actually out buying a significant amount of government-backed debt. So that's treasuries, that is government-backed mortgages, right? So that's a significant role that it's already playing, basically buying up these debts. But here's the thing that they've been doing recently that's unprecedented, and it's something that we definitely need to be talking about. It is now actually directly is directly buying corporate bonds. So for people who don't understand, the Federal Reserve, it works with banks. Primarily, the way to think about it is it's the lender of last resort. If you're a major bank and you're short at the end of the day, you can go to the Federal Reserve to basically loan out the money that you need. And in extreme situations, need to make the amount of money that you need to have cash on hand. And in extreme situations, the Federal Reserve has taken these extra steps basically to shore up the market, buying, debts or other financial products from banks to sort of allow them to stand on their own 2 feet. Now, what the Federal Reserve is doing right now is actually going directly to corporations. So before, the Federal Reserve would shore up the financial system by going through the banks, and then the banks, in theory and in practice, would then, pass on those stimulus to corporations. What's happening now is the Federal Reserve is going directly to corporate America by buying corporate bonds. Why is this a problem? Because the Federal Reserve basically is subverting Congress and subverting the U.S. government as the primary interaction for its relationship with corporate America. What's very frightening about this is as we're fighting for this bailout, right, and we're trying to get the best policies that we possibly can get, the Federal Reserve is basically operating in a way that they're going to be buying these corporate bonds, basically giving influxes of cash to these corporations that need it, by the way. Like, we need to shore up the economy in this crisis situation. But they're doing it in a way that is actually undermining the position of Congress, undermining the position of the federal government to impose its will on corporate America. So, there's been a lot of talk about like, oh, well, if the Federal Reserve is buying these corporate bonds, and the limits that they've put on corporations is very small. As long as these corporations are as long as these corporations, when these corporations are paying back their interest, and if they're foregoing their interest payments, which they would do initially, they are not allowed to use this money for stock buybacks, right?
Right.
Which is good on one level, but it's such a small piece of the pie. There's no provisions on stopping golden parachutes, paying out the CEOs. There's no rules on bonuses. There's no rules on employee aid, making sure that you're not laying off huge amounts of your company during this crisis. Basically, they're allowing the stockholders and the C-suite aspects of the corporations to thrive without making sure that everyday Americans, the employees in these corporations, are safe. So people have the right to be very angry about the lack of democracy and the lack of transparency in the Fed actions. The fact is that the Federal Reserve made this decision on their own, right? They are not necessarily going through Congress or going even through the president to participate in these massive decisions in our society. People are absolutely right to see the Federal Reserve as a kind of mysterious institution. And we should be demanding much more democracy from that organization, and also being more creative in how we can use it. I will say that when we see these numbers, like $1.5 trillion being pumped into the financial sector, while people are hearing, that their neighbors, their family members themselves are very worried about being able to afford rent at the end of the month, being very worried about being able to afford food, they're very right to be angry. I want to make the point, though, that as long as we live in this system, and I don't think we should be living in this system, we are so connected to financial capital that if that system collapses, the crisis will get much worse.
Right.
We are so connected to that world that we actually are connected to the profits of the super wealthy, not in a way that we benefit from it, but in a way that when their profits go down, we can be absolutely devastated. So, there are some actions that the Federal Reserve will have to take in the context of the system that we are in. But we are not talking about preserving that system at all. And we actually need to start going beyond that. See, that's where a lot of liberals would go. There's like, oh, well, I don't really like this, but I know this has to happen. No, we should be saying there's no way that our livelihood and our lives as people in this massive country should be held up by the profits of a very small group of this country. The fact is that the rich have too much power and they have too much control over our resources, that when they are threatened, we are also tied into their own profit, that if their profit starts evaporating, then we lose our jobs, we lose our access to food, we lose our access to credit, right? And we are saying that we want to break from that system. So we need to be pushing for a large democratic push in the Federal Reserve. The fact is this: the Federal Reserve did something this week which is unprecedented. The Federal Reserve did something in 2008 that was unprecedented. We need to understand that politics is about power, and institutions respond to power. The fact is that in our society, the power is so skewed towards the super wealthy and the elite that they bend the rules. They come up with new programs. I mean, the way that the Federal Reserve is couching this program, by the way, to buy corporate bonds, is very complicated because they know that technically they can't really do it, right? But they're finding a creative way to get around those rules. There's no reason that we cannot use these kind of financial mechanisms in the future to pursue left-wing radical goals. And we need to remember these when we are in power and control these institutions, that we can use these for radical means. Here's the thing. We are living through another global crisis. This time it didn't begin in finance, but finance is certainly going to amplify and extend the crisis much further. We did not learn our lessons in 2008. We cannot do half measures. We need to make sure that we are empowering Congress and the people to, one, begin to start nationalizing some of these banks. Right? We need to have, and if not full out nationalizations, we need to have massive stakes, and not kind of half-assed stakes where, we just hold it for a couple years and then, we get a little bit of our investment back. No, we need to be owning these banks and making them work for the public good. The same goes for corporate America. There's no reason that we should not be starting to talk and putting this idea into people's heads about nationalization. Oil and gas companies are very cheap right now. We could be taking those over if we had we cared about climate change and doing something about the devastation that we're going to face in the short term and also in the long term. We need to be absolutely pushing to corporations to no longer look toward stockholders first and workers second. We have the power, we have the leverage, we have the ability to do it. The problem is that we have a government that is much more interested in benefiting the wealthy in this country, and that goes for Republicans and Democrats. Though it must be said that the GOP is heinous in their willingness to participate in this.
And there is no populist pivot on the right. Bullshit.
That's true. No, exactly. I mean, as much as Trump likes to talk, basically his whole bailout package has been about empowering the wealthiest. And basically what they're doing is they're using every tool in their arsenal to benefit the people at the top, while the rest of us truly suffer. So we need to start being more radical and pushing back on these kind of half-assed kind of left liberal proposals too when it comes to these institutions, and say, you know what, they break these rules all the time. We need to start saying that we have the ability and the power, and we're going to build that power to start using these for radical methods, because we need a radical solution. We're seeing the entire world collapsing around us right now. The reality is radical, and it's time that we meet it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, I want to just really say to folks, and we try to do it on the show, and I think David does a really, really good job with it. It's really important to read the financial pages. It's really important to both not be intimidated by the jargon and the terminology and the charts. That's the kind of social capital of intimidating people. Get over that. You're all smart. You can understand things. And that's where the action is. I mean, you gotta, among multiple sites, but it's like Amber Frost actually had a great piece about why leftists can enjoy the Financial Times more than the New York Times. And among, many other reasons, it was like, well, at least we all know we're actually on a battlefield. And it's also like you need to, understand, how these dynamics are actually working.
You just watched a Michael Brooks show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.